I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring Gang or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and today I'm going to tell you about an inmate at Angola who really became famous for his good deeds while he was incarcerated at Angola and his amazing talent. And wait till we get into that. But what landed him inside the wire was just a horrible crime, and he was an inmate who had the nickname at Angola, Grasshopper. His name he was born with was Lloyd Leggett. Now, I did a lot of research on this one, and I came across some newspaper articles from his actual crime when they occurred, the manhunt for Lloyd Leggett, and also the capture of not only Grasshopper, but his accomplice. And all this occurred in the 1970s, over 50 years ago. There's actually a pretty interesting attempted escape that we're going to get into. So the way I'm going to do this one today is I'm going to reference those articles that I came across, and I'm going to kind of take you through time with this guy. And I promise you, when we get to what he did with his life inside Angola, you're probably going to be surprised like I was. And I'll start off by referencing an article that was written in the News Digest, which was an Amite City, Louisiana newspaper where this crime occurred. And this article was dated March 31st of 1971. And the headline said, "Arcola couple shot to death. Last rites to be held today." A Tangipahoa Parish man and his wife were shot to death during an apparent robbery Monday night in the grocery store they operated near Arcola, Sheriff Frank Edwards reported today. Milton and Cora Davidson, both 62, were slain about 6:30 p.m. in their store 3 miles from Arcola. The couple were found by a young man who came into the store shortly after the robbery/murder. Davidson was found just behind the cash register, which was open and empty. Miss Davidson was found shot about 5 feet away from him at the end of the counter. Davidson, who was shot once in the head above the left eye, died some 15 minutes after arriving at Charity Hospital in Independence. Miss Davidson was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. She was shot just below the nose. Both victims were shot with a .22 caliber gun. The bullets have been recovered and ballistics tests are being made on those bullets. There was no sign of a struggle. Technicians from the State Police Crime Lab were dispatched to the scene to search for clues. Roadblocks were set up on highways in the area. Mr. and Miss Davidson lived in rooms behind the grocery store. The bodies were at Mount Nebo Baptist Church at 6 p.m. Tuesday night, with services at the church at 2 p.m. Wednesday. They were both natives of this area. So let me explain this real quick. Amite City, Louisiana, in the early 70s, very small town. Stuff like that just did not happen in that area. And these were elderly people, very well known in the community, entrepreneurs, store owners. So everybody that was in that area went to that store. They were just very well-liked people and killed pretty brutally, shot in the face. And the police at this time did not have much to go on. All they had was spent shell casings. And on April 7th of 1971, there was sort of an update that came out on the Tangi Talk, which is another paper in that area. And it said, investigation continues in Davidson slaying. Captain Charles Bender of the Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's Department said that the investigation was continuing into the slaying of Mr. and Miss Milton Davidson, who were killed at their store on Arcola Road. Mr. Davidson lived for some 15 minutes after being taken to the hospital, and Miss Davidson was conscious when she was found. Quote, we are continuing to track down leads, and the investigation is pending. The couple was found shot to death at their store on Arcola Road. Both had been shot with a .22 caliber gun. They were found last Monday night about 6:30 p.m. by a young man who came into the store shortly after the shooting. He ran into the highway, stopped a car to go for assistance after hearing Miss Davidson's call for help. Davidson, who was shot above the left eye, died about 15 minutes after being taken to the hospital. Miss Davidson had been shot just below the nose. So at that point in time, they're investigating it, but they don't have a whole lot of leads that the public knows about. They apparently did have more leads than they were letting out, which is typical. And on April 28th of 1971, 2 men from Kansas were actually charged with the murder of the Davidsons. And the News Digest had this article. 2 men from Kansas have been charged with the murder and robbery of Mr. and Miss Milton Davis. It was announced by Sheriff Frank Edwards Jr. A second robbery, murder, and kidnapping in Kansas led to the arrest, April 2nd, of Richard Lee Leggett, 19, of Newton, Kansas, and Dwight Martin Kafka, 29, of Hutchinson, Kansas. They are charged in Kansas with the slaying of James Leo Armour of Little River, Kansas, father of 13 children, the robbery of the man he farmed for. So apparently one of these guys worked for the guy that they ended up robbing. And the kidnapping of 5 members of the Wayne Ludstrom family. Armour was slain with a .22 caliber pistol. The Davidsons were both killed with a .22 caliber at close range about 6:35 p.m. on March 29th at their store, and about $200 was taken from the cash register. Since that time, Edwards had had his deputies working day and night on the case. He sent ballistic bullets all over the United States, and it was one of them which led the Kansas Bureau of Investigation to send bullets from the .22s in the possession of the accused pair to a meet. Ballistic experts at the Louisiana State Crime Lab in Baton Rouge said the bullet from one of the guns was fired from the same one which killed the Davidsons. The other bullet recovered during the autopsy was so mishappened that further examination was necessary. Last week, Edwards and Captain Charles Binder went to Kansas to talk with the pair. They obtained signed statements from both, which admitted to the Arcola slayings. Edwards and District Attorney Leonard Yoakum would call a special session of the grand jury to indict them, and that Tangipahoa Parish would begin extradition proceedings to return them to Louisiana to stand trial immediately after they are tried in Kansas. Leggett and Kafka had left Kansas on March 27th to go into the counterfeiting business. Actually considered that a business in California, they said. In Austin, Texas, they headed east, going to Baton Rouge, then back to Amite, and on to Arcola, where the killings took place. In Bogalusa, they stopped to get something to eat. They went east through Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee, where they abandoned the car, a blue 1964 Ford, before returning to Kansas on a bus. Leggett had been in reform school. He had been born at Fort Polk, but since the age of 4 had not been in Louisiana. He is 6'3.5". Caffa is 6'2" and has never been to Louisiana before. On February 15th, he had been released from Kansas State Penitentiary after serving a sentence for burglary. So they have these two guys, and again, April 28th, 1971, they were charged. They end up getting these confessions. They get signed confessions at that. And on May 26th, 1971, the next update from the Tangi talk, and it says Kansas pair indicted in Tangipahoa slangs. Richard Lee Leggett and Dwight Kafka, both of Kansas, were indicted here Thursday by a Tangi Parish grand jury for the March 29th murder of an Arcola couple. The accused pair was also indicted for the armed robbery of Mr. and Miss Milton Davidson at their rural grocery store. Leggett and Kafka are in jail in Lyons, Kansas, where they are charged with a murder and kidnapping. District Attorney Leonard Yoakum said he is anticipating extradition papers. The Davidsons were found dead shortly after they were robbed. Sheriff Frank Edwards said in announcing the arrest of the pair last month that Leggett and Kafka had been traced to Kansas, into Texas, through Louisiana, and on to Tennessee before they both returned to Kansas. Both have signed statements related to the killing in Tangipahoa Parish. So they get indicted, and on February 4th of 1972, these guys got sentenced. And Morning World in Monroe brought this article. It says, 2 Kansas men were each sentenced to double terms of life in prison here Thursday in the murder of an elderly Arcola couple at their grocery store last March. Richard Leggett, 20, of Newton, Kansas, and Dwight Kafke, 29, of Hutchinson, Kansas, were given double life sentences plus 30 years in prison for armed robbery of Mr. and Miss Milton Davidson. Last October, Leggett and Kafke pleaded innocent by reason of insanity. Under state law, a person is allowed to plead. A sanity hearing was held for them Thursday in state district court. 3 physicians testified, and Judge Grover Covington ruled the pair sane. Leggett and Kafke then consulted with their lawyers and changed their pleas to guilty to the armed robbery and guilty without capital punishment to the murder. So they cut a deal there. They said, hey, we're not going to execute you if you plead guilty. They also waived delay in sentencing. The judge ruled the sentences are to be served concurrently with any sentences previously imposed. This means the 2 men will be returned to Kansas, where they had been sentenced in the death of a Little River, Kansas man. He was killed less than a week after the Davidsons were shot to death on March 29, 1971. Leggett was convicted and sentenced in the Little River incident to 15 years to life and 5 years to life on several kidnap charges. Kafke had been sentenced to life in prison. If pardoned or paroled, they must return to Louisiana to serve any remaining time in the Davidson deaths. So at that point, they have to go to Kansas. And this is where it gets really muddy, because judging by what I read in that article, I'm thinking they're screwed. They're in Kansas for the rest of their life. But Leggett did make his way to Angola shortly after. The trail just kind of falls off as to why, but I'll tell you, on October 11th of 1978, an article was put out by the Miami Herald, and it tells a story of an escape attempt, or an accused escape attempt, by Richard Leggett. And I'm just going to read you this article. It says he was there the whole time. It says since he never had escaped, it was difficult for Richard Leggett to explain the escape conviction on his criminal record. The Louisiana Supreme Court has rectified the situation, reversing Leggett's escape conviction by ruling there was no evidence he left Angola State Penitentiary. Leggett failed to show up for his work assignment one morning in 1977, and after a day-long search was found curled up with a novel and lying on a pillow inside a conveyor machine in the prison cannery. Leggett eventually was indicted and convicted of simple escape. He was sentenced to an extra 4 years in jail. In the 5-2 decision, the court said Leggett might be subject to prison discipline rules for the episode, but nothing more. So he appealed an accusation of escape, and his, I guess, point there, what it sounds like to me was, he technically never escaped. He was on Angola property the whole time. And then I dug a little deeper. I came across an appeal that the state had issued, and I'm just going to read that to you. It says, defendant was legally committed to the state penitentiary in Angola on February 3rd, 1972. He was assigned to a dormitory in the medium security complex area. In addition, defendant was assigned to work in the prison's tag plant, making license plates, y'all. The record also reflects that the prior start of the workday, inmates have the option to leave the dormitory, go to the kitchen area for breakfast, or remain in the dormitory. Whether they remain in the dormitory or depart for breakfast, inmates are required to report to their job assignment no later than 8 o'clock a.m. The inmates, whether in the dormitory kitchen area or at their work assignment, are the responsibility of the prison officer assigned to the particular area or building. The inmates may be excused from any of their work assignments or assigned areas on various, quote, call-outs. Example, attorney call-outs, hospital call-outs, visits, education call-outs, and classification call-outs. We note also that inmates walk from area to area along a fenced walkway unescorted by guards. The officer in charge of the defendant's dormitory, John Frank, testified he saw the defendant in the dormitory at approximately 7:30 a.m. on April 6 of 1977. He stated that at 7:55 a.m. he received a call from Edward Thomas, the prison officer assigned to the tag plant. He stated that Leggett had not reported for work at the plant. A search for the defendant in the dorm was made without success. A prison chase crew subsequently located Leggett hiding in the conveyor machine at the prison cannery at approximately 5 p.m. The defendant was found inside the machine lying down on his back with his hands resting on his stomach. He had a pillow or something in the form of a pillow under his head. He even had a pocket novel to read. It was noticed the defendant had apparently taken 2 pieces of cardboard and placed them on both sides of the conveyor machine so he could not be observed inside the machine. Upon discovery, the defendant neither struggled nor attempted to get away from the search crew. He had not broken or damaged anything while hiding in the cannery building. The prison cannery is located approximately 250 to 300 yards from the tag plant, the defendant's assigned place of work. So apparently that's how he tried to escape. Surprisingly, the Supreme Court kind of ruled in Leggett's favor on that and said technically he never escaped the prison. He attempted to escape, but he never escaped. Just interesting and kind of bizarre. And then again, things kind of fall off for Leggett. Apparently he was minding his manners in prison. And then in 2005, an article comes out. Now I want you to remember, Leggett went to prison at 20 years old. So even in 2005, he's not that damn old. But a really interesting article comes out in 2005. It's by Gary Fields of the Wall Street Journal. And it says, at the Angola State Penitentiary here, Richard Leggett, a yellow pencil tucked behind his right ear, put the molding on his latest creation, a 7-foot coffin. He worked with some urgency, sewing and stapling the white bedding inside. He always likes to keep 3 coffins in stock so he doesn't run out. Half a mile away, one of the other handmade caskets, birch and pine, stained in rich blue, were being laid in the ground at the prison cemetery. It held the body of a 57-year-old fellow inmate in prison since the 70s for killing a 13-year-old girl. As the prison's coffin maker, Mr. Leggett, 53 years old, has been busy. The prison has needed 1 or 2 of his caskets in each of the last 5 weeks. At Angola, 97% of the inmates now die in prison. The rise of lengthy mandatory sentences and nationwide tough-on-crime attitude has resulted in a booming prison population. 2.1 million last June, and then it goes through stats on that are not important. Inmates often arrive at prison in the physical condition of someone 10 to 15 years older because of lack of health care, and it goes through that. Again, not important. At Angola, funerals are elaborate affairs with handmade coffins pulled to graves by horse-drawn carriages and rites conducted almost entirely by inmates. Warden Burl Kane believes such services are stabilizing influence, keeping inmates busy and offering purpose to those who have no hope of leaving alive. Quote, "A man wants to be productive, even the ones here," the warden said. Once known as the bloodiest prison in America, inmates at Angola used to fashion weapons from inconspicuous items such as toothbrushes or towels to maim and kill. A murder a month was considered normal. Today, though, it isn't the Angola of, quote, Dead Man Walking or Monsters Ball, two movies filmed here. Now it's an older Angola, and death comes typically from natural causes. Last year, 20 inmates at Angola died of natural causes. This year, 23 have died already, none of them from inmate-on-inmate violence. The prison lost its oldest inmate earlier this year, a 95-year-old. Who had been in and out of prison since Harry Truman was president. During the last decade, there have only been 4 prison murders at Angola. Some inmates attribute that to what they call, quote, criminal menopause, meaning when they hit a certain age, their violent nature dissipates. They also credit the warden, a former teacher, who said he came to correction because high school students were too unruly. To deal with its aging population, over 500 inmates in Angola have been trained to perform CPR. There's a hospice here for those who are making final stages of terminal illnesses. And Warden Kane has created a funeral industry of which Mr. Leggett's coffin making is a primary piece. Other inmates make shrouds for the caskets and planned services. Angola gets society's most serious offenders, child molesters, murderers, and rapists. 2 years ago, the prison stopped accepting anyone with a sentence of less than 50 years, meaning few will ever leave. Quote, "A couple of decades after I got here, people actually got out. We used to have a call out every workday where 3 or 4 would be called out. They were going home." This from Douglas Dennis, 69, who arrived here in 1957 and is serving a double life sentence for killing 2 prisoners in fights. He is now a writer for The Angolite, an award-winning prison publication whose death listings are scoured by the inmates. Now, quote, "They might as well have welded the doors shut. About half of those who died in Angola are buried in the prison's grounds because inmates have lost touch with their families and have no one to collect the remains. Even your bones don't get a second chance to get out," said Mr. Dennis, the prison's unofficial historian. The Mississippi River forms 3 of the institution's 4 borders, and Tunica Hills, an area of snakes, trees, and wild animals, is 4th. Established as a prison in 1880, Angola gets its nickname from the plantation that preceded it, which in turn was named for the area of Africa where most of its slaves had come from. Except for the occasional vehicle, there is no mechanical noise. During the day, groups of inmates carrying hoes, shovels, and sling blades head to the fields where they grow 4 million pounds of produce, ranging from corn to wheat each year. At night, only lights from various cells on the 18,000-acre compound dot the darkness. The prison grounds are larger than the island of Manhattan, and you've heard that many times. When there are violent incidents and attempted escapes, they are dealt with swiftly. Officers are put into cell block J, where they remain in 6x8 cells 23 hours a day for a minimum of 6 months. They aren't allowed to make telephone calls, smoke, or have visitors. Quote, "At Angola, life means life," said Warden Kane, 62, the short, white-haired warden who occasionally rides his Harley-Davidson down the 20-mile asphalt highway that dead ends the prison gates. He had mixed feelings about his elderly inmates. Quote, "Prison shouldn't be a place for dying old men. It should be a place for predators." For years, inmates were buried in flimsy coffins that resembled shipping crates, each costing between $650 to $900. In June of 1995, the prison was preparing to bury Joseph Siegel, a 69-year-old prisoner who had been convicted in 1971 for burglary and murdering a state senator. As the inmates lifted Mr. Siegel's coffin to lay into the freshly dug grave, his body fell through the bottom of the casket. They carefully laid the coffin over the body and started to shovel dirt over the coffin. The lid then caved in. Warden Kane, then only in his first year on the job, was disgusted. Quote, "Once a man dies, his sentence is complete and there should be dignity in passing, he said. He asked some inmates, including Eugene Redwine, who had committed the murder with Mr. Siegel and was known for his carpentry skills, whether they could build a coffin. The inmates agreed, making a coffin in 2 weeks at a cost of $250, considerably less than the prison had been paying and much higher quality. Mr. Leggett, now the principal coffin maker here, has only been to one funeral in his 34 years at Angola. It was after the March 2003 death of his mentor and predecessor, Mr. Redwine. He sat on the front row in the chapel inside the hospice, the area reserved for family. There was no one else there for the 74-year-old man. Mr. Leggett said his mentor taught him the importance of doing his job well. He said, quote, "Give it your best effort. If you're going to do something, give it your best." He instilled that in me. The two met after Mr. Leggett, who came to the prison as a virtual teenager, had been in the two-man cell for 6 years. Mr. Redwine, nearly twice Mr. Leggett's age, started teaching the younger inmate about carpentry. Mr. Leggett took to it and began reading everything he could. The two became skilled carpenters, making furniture, rocking chairs, and toys, most of which went to the staff. Now, there's little Mr. Leggett can't make. All he needs is a picture or a drawing. Cabinets, dressers, and potato bins are all in his repertoire. Most items are used at the prison, and a few are sold. He earns the prison's top wage, 20 cents an hour, giving him spending money for incidentals. He enjoys admiring his finished products, especially the coffins. If you'd seen what they were buried in before, you'd understand, he said. Nicknamed Grasshopper in his early days here because he was skinny with long limbs, he killed a man and a woman on May 29, 1971, near Amite, Louisiana, as he robbed their store. When asked how he remembers the exact date, he spits tobacco juice on the ground and replies, "Why would I remember it?" That's something that weighs on your mind. I have a lot of regrets. Today, Mr. Leggett is a heavyset man with thick glasses, a bad heart valve, and diabetes. Because he's an inmate trustee, which means he's a low risk for behavior violations, he isn't under constant guard and lives with the other trustees in a cell block reserved for them. A loner, Mr. Leggett spends most of his time in the carpentry shop, working with two assistants, meticulously going over every detail. You never can tell, he said, standing near one of the oblong boxes, when one of them is going to be yours. This month, Mr. Leggett had to increase his work schedule. 2 inmates died and another committed suicide in a 5-day period. All were buried in the prison cemetery, cleaning out his entire stock of caskets. For the funeral, Richard Sedgwick Hart, the man who killed a 13-year-old girl, inmates gathered at the prison park. They followed the prison's hearse, a black horse-drawn carriage built by inmates in 1998 to resemble hearses used in the 1800s. Diamond and Laddie, a pair of white 2,200-pound Percherian horses, descendants of the warden's own champion Percherian, pulled the carriage onto the road of the cemetery, with little urging from coachman Lloyd Bones Bone. Mr. Bone, a gaunt, unsmiling man with hollowed cheeks, had been here since 1971 when he stabbed a man during a knife fight in Algiers, one of the toughest sections of New Orleans. The loser died. The winner got life in Angola. And of course, I told you all about Bone just last week. A few years ago, Warden Kane asked Mr. Bone, who helped tend the horses at the prison stable, to drive the horse. The job stuck. The warden bought him a tuxedo and a top hat and named him Dr. Death. Sitting ramrod straight atop the hearse, Mr. Bone said he never looked back at the carriage, but adds, "I'll never forget what I'm carrying." At 64, he frequently thinks about what his own ride will be like. Who's going to drive the hearse when my time comes? Mr. Sedgwick Hart had no family at the funeral service. His mother died a month before, and he did not have anyone to claim him. 4 dozen inmates who knew the deceased walked behind the hearse to Point Lookout 2. The prison cemetery opened that in 1996. There have been 97 funerals here in 9 years. Its predecessor, Point Lookout 1, a short distance away, has 332 marked graves and an unknown number of unmarked ones. Officials stopped using it when they began digging a new grave and discovered human bones were already there. Since April, funerals have been so frequent that the ground hasn't settled enough on 10 graves to add the simple white crosses used to mark burial plots. The inmates sing Amazing Grace along with the clomping of the horse hooves. All of them have been in Angola at least 10 years, most for much longer. Every detail of the service, from the hand-dug grave to the braiding of the horse tails, was done by the inmates, with an extension program from the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. There are ample inmate ministers to conduct the funeral. They quoted scripture, sang hymns without Bibles or notes. At the cemetery, 3 inmates asked an assistant warden if they could request that their families bury them there one day. One by one, the inmates walked to the casket, touched it, and looked at pictures of Mr. Cedric Hart on top. At the grave site, the inmates sing a cappella, "I'm free, praise the Lord, I'm free. No longer bound, no chains holding me. My soul is resting. It's just a blessing. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. I'm free." Very well-written article, and what we found out there was this insane talent that Richard Leggett possessed, and also the highest paid inmate at the prison, 20 cents an hour, highest paid inmate. And then the next time Mr. Leggett appears in the news was 2018, some 13 years after the article I just referenced came out, and cruxnow.com put out an article, and it was discussing Billy Graham and the casket he was laid to rest in. And I'll move to the aspect of the article that is critical to our story today. It says, in 1977, Chuck Colson, an evangelical Christian who had served prison time for obstruction of justice in the Watergate scandal and who had become a national prison minister, visited Angola with Tex Reardon, who was associated with Graham in his worldwide evangelical crusade. Quote, in the 1950s, my mother would send a check of $5 every month to Billy Graham, even though she was a school teacher and my parents were poor. So I asked Tex Reardon if there was any way he could get Billy Graham to come here because the prison needed him, and he's referencing Angola. Not long after that, Graham's son Franklin visited Angola and was so impressed that he set the wheels in motion for the construction of 2 more chapels, one for the inmates and another for the employees of our little city, Kane was quoted as saying. They wanted their own people to come build it because it was a ministry for them, Kane said. They wanted the pews to be just old-timey so it would look like an old-timey church, and he's referencing that the prisoners wanted to build it. They put an old bell in the top of the imposing steeple. The bell came from a locomotive that hauled sugarcane around the 18,000-acre Angola plantation in the late 1800s before it became a prison that was larger than the island of Manhattan. The Grahams wanted the steeple to be tall enough so you could see the church from death row, Kane said. During one of Franklin Graham's visits to Angola, he walked into the prison museum and saw an inmate-made casket. He was overwhelmed by the beauty and simplicity of the treated plywood. The white bedding for the inside of the coffins came from Walmart. Warden Kane said, quote, he told me this is one my dad would want to be buried in. It's so plain, but it's built by prisoners. We got to have these, Kane said. Franklin Graham ordered 6 coffins, including one for his father and his wife Ruth, who died in 2007. 3 inmates, Richard Grasshopper Leggett, Clarence, quote, Mr. Bud Wilkerson, and David Bacon had the special assignment. Of the 3, only Bacon is still alive. He was paroled in December of 2012. Quote, they would pray before they started every day and ask that God would anoint their work because this was a very serious thing to them, Kane said. Billy Graham was a human. He wasn't God, but he was one of the godliest humans on earth. They took it very seriously, and it was a reverent operation. At Franklin Graham's request, the 3 inmates would burn their names into the outside of each casket. Graham was laid to rest on March 2nd in that Angola coffin after lying for 2 days in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Kane said the convergence of sacred circumstances, how Graham and faith brought peace to Angola and how Angola brought peace to the Graham family, leaves him almost speechless. Quote, if my mother in heaven knows what's going on down here, she would be proud because she wrote those little $5 checks, it influenced her son to like Billy Graham, Kane said. She led me in that direction. While because of ill health, Graham never could visit Angola, Kane sent him a key to one of Angola's oldest cells. A few years ago, Kane traveled to the mountains of North Carolina to offer his thanks for all that Graham and his son had made possible at Angola. Quote, I got to spend the afternoon with him, and he said, I pray for you every day, and my nurse can verify it. And then he took out the key, and he said, every day I have a devotional, and I hold the key you gave me in my hand, and I pray for you, and I pray for your prison. No wonder we were successful, Kane said. So how about that? This guy, and you can never take away from the crime he committed, brutally killing two elderly people, shooting them in the face, but even in prison, he ended up not only finding a talent and putting it to good use, making all these coffins for prison inmates, becoming really probably the best ever in carpentry at Angola, the highest paid prisoner in Angola, but also made a coffin for, and I would agree with this, one of the most godliest humans, if not the godliest human of all time, in the Reverend Billy Graham. Unbelievable. And as I mentioned in that article, Richard Leggett did pass away. He was 55 years old. He passed away in 2007, and I'll read you just his short obituary. It says, Richard Lee Leggett, 55, passed away Wednesday, March 21st of 2007 after a long illness. Services were held at Miller Funeral Home on Saturday, March 24th. Richard, or quote, Grasshopper, as he was known by his many friends everywhere, worked with wood and leather most of his life. His handcrafted works will be cherished by many people. Survivors include two brothers, John of Wichita, Kansas, and Bill of Newton, Kansas, one sister, Joyce of El Dorado, and one grandson, Chris Lee. He is survived by several nieces and nephews. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Richard Lee Leggett Memorial Fund, care of the hospice program in Angola, Louisiana. So there you have it. I just found that to be very interesting, a story I came across as I was working on the story that I told you last week about Bones. So if you haven't heard that one yet, check it out. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Patreon for commercial-free early releases. And until next time, I'm Jim Chapman for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang or Angola